Hi guys, I hope you're all doing really well. My name is Sarah and welcome to What the Horror, the channel where we talk about horror movies old and new. Welcome to the evolution of the jump scare, where we delve into the heart-pounding world of horror cinema's most iconic and controversial technique, the jump scare. A staple of the genre for decades, jump scares have both sent shivers down the spines of audiences and caused irritation and disappointment, leaving an indelible mark on the collective psyche of moviegoers. But what exactly is a jump scare, and why do they have such a profound impact on us? In this episode, we'll unravel the mystery behind the jump scare phenomenon, exploring everything from its biological effects on the human body to its evolution in film over the years. As we journey through this exploration, we'll uncover the biological mechanisms that drive our reactions to jump scares, examining how they hijack our fight or flight response and send our bodies into overdrive. We'll investigate whether there's any way to outsmart these cinematic terrors or if we're doomed to succumb to their chilling grip. We'll chart the evolution of jump scares in horror films, from their humble beginnings in the silent film era to their modern day incarnations. A jump scare in a horror film is a sudden, unexpected moment designed to startle or frighten the audience. It typically involves the sudden appearance of a frightening image, sound, or event, often accompanied by a dramatic increase in volume or intensity. Jump scares are used strategically by filmmakers to evoke a visceral reaction of fear or surprise from viewers, heightening suspense and tension in the narrative. And while they are a staple of the horror genre, jump scares can vary widely in their execution, from subtle and atmospheric to loud and shocking. Despite their sometimes divisive reputation among audiences, jump scares remain an effective tool for filmmakers to elicit immediate and powerful emotional responses from their viewers. So, what types of jump scares are there? According to this wonderful website called Where's the Jump, there are around 9 different types of jump scares, including the fridge door scare, which involves a character closing the door to a fridge or a cupboard to reveal that someone or something is standing on the other side. This scare is usually signposted by the angle of the camera, focusing on the open door rather than the contents inside, obscuring our view. The car window scare, which involves a person or an animal appearing at the car window suddenly and scaring the person in the car. These are usually a fake out jump scare, but as Where's the Jump says, this scare requires some suspension of disbelief, as it would entail the person or animal doing the scare to appear without being seen or heard by the person in the car. The animal scare, also known as the cat scare. These scares are often considered one of the laziest attempts at a jump scare and involve an animal, usually a cat, jumping out at a character during a tense scene. Again, like the car window scare, these are usually a fake-out scare. The mirror scare. While the mirror scare has been a staple of the horror genre for years, there are many variants within it. Some versions involve a character using a bathroom where the mirror is on an open door, and once they close it, it's revealed that someone is stood behind them. You also have the version where a character is washing their face or brushing their teeth, leaning over the sink with the camera focusing on them, and then when they stand up, again, it is revealed that someone is stood behind them. There are further versions such as a character wiping steam off a mirror to reveal someone or a reflection that moves independently of the character. The peephole scare. This scare involves a character looking through a peephole or a keyhole. The camera then shows us what the character sees, and after a few seconds, something will move past suddenly or appear directly in front of the keyhole, such as an eye. Putting you, the audience, in first-person perspective creates a level of confinement and claustrophobia. It's an intense and intimate field of vision that feels difficult to hide from, as there is nowhere to look but through the keyhole. The false awakening. This involves a character waking from a dream or a nightmare only to realize that they're still dreaming and then experience a jump scare, often a corpse or monster next to them. Where's the Jump describes this scare as effective because when the character wakes up, the audience is then lulled into a false sense of security and subconsciously relaxes, making them much more susceptible to further scares. After all, most of the horror happens at night, in the dark, and waking up signifies to us the morning, a fresh day, the safety of light. The delayed scare. This scare usually occurs after a long and tense scene. The audience is led to believe the danger has passed and nothing is going to happen, only for the scare to occur seconds later. The death scenes in the Final Destination franchise often use this method, and it also happens in The Exorcist 3, in one of the greatest jump scares in film history, in my opinion. And finally, the not quite dead scare. This is an absolute staple of the slasher subgenre and is commented on in the meta horror film Scream. This scare involves the heroes of the film defeating the killer or villain. The hero then begins to relax, believing the danger to be over, only for the supposed dead killer to suddenly come back for one last scare. Of course, I'm sure there are other ones that are not on this list, but I think we can all recognise these and can probably even think of examples for each one. In terms of the differing types of jump scares, they can be broadly categorised into two camps, the fake out and the true jump scare. The fake out is the classic cat jumps out of a cupboard or someone bangs on the window scenario. These scares build a bit of tension and then deliver a sudden shock, but the character is never in any real danger, as the source of the scare is typically a harmless person or animal. On the other hand, the true jump scare occurs when filmmakers meticulously build up tension, putting the audience on edge, and then reward them with a scare involving the villain or monster. Director James Wan, a prolific user of jump scares in his films, has stated in past interviews that he prefers to use the true jump scare. He aims to make the audience's experience worthwhile by ensuring that the scare is genuine and consequential, rather than just startling them for essentially nothing. Jump scares create a biological response in humans that actually have evolutionary origins. They are part of the body's innate survival mechanisms, often referred to as the fight or flight response. Through human evolution and early history, encountering sudden threats to our safety or dangers was a common everyday occurrence. In these situations, people needed to react quickly to either confront the threat, fight, or flee from it, flight, in order to survive, hence fight or flight. Another name for this reaction is the startle response, something that is deeply rooted in human nature and something that we share with numerous other species. According to anthropologist Ronald C. Simons, the startle response is universal in mammals, reptiles, birds, and amphibians. It is a, quote, invariant response to a sudden, intense stimulus, unquote. Whether it's an unexpected visual appearance, a sudden loud noise, or an unexpected touch in the darkness, the startle response evolved as a protective mechanism against sudden threats. Physiological changes that happen to us during a startle response are all things that helped our ancestors respond effectively to potential dangers in their environment, allowing them to hopefully survive. So, what actually happens to us when we experience a jump scare or a startle? When a person experiences a sudden fright, their body undergoes various physiological reactions as part of the fight or flight response, which include an increased heart rate due to the release of adrenaline that helps prepare the body for action, as well as muscle tension. An initial blink immediately after the scare, protecting the eyes from trauma, followed by the pupils dilating so that more light can enter the eyes and allow the person to see clearer and assess the situation. Rapid and shallow breathing, which helps to oxygenate the blood and prepare the body for sudden physical exertion. Sweating also often occurs during a scare, as it can help regulate the body's temperature. And finally, heightened sensory perception. During a startle or a scare, the senses may become more acute as the body becomes hyper-aware of its surroundings. While it is almost impossible to prevent the jump scare working on you, there are factors that can make you more susceptible to them and ways to ease the effect of the scare. For example, watching a horror film while you are tired or sleep deprived makes you far more susceptible to the startle response, as well as watching a horror film while you're already feeling anxious. It is much harder for us to regulate our feelings, our fear, while we are tired and emotionally worn out. Another factor that can increase the likelihood of you jumping at the jump scare is watching horror films in the theatre. The cinema can be an intense viewing experience. You're cocooned in darkness with no distractions, hopefully. The image is big and bold, filling your eye space, and most cinemas have incredible sound systems that can feel like an assault on your senses. And according to the article Stop Startling, published on Slate, psychologists have demonstrated in the lab that people are actually startled more violently in the dark than in light surroundings. So, what, if anything, can you do to ease the effects of the jump scare? Well, funnily enough, trying to prepare yourself for it, trying to brace against the effect, can actually lead to you being more startled. By bracing yourself, you become hypervigilant, activating the amygdala, the part of the brain that is closely associated with fear, emotions, and motivation. You can reduce the effect by closing your eyes or looking away, but this won't stop the effectiveness of the scare, it only lessens it. Sound is one of the most important aspects of the jump scare, as an audio stimulus can be processed by the brain faster than a visual one, and so it creates a much more immediate response. Sound, especially diegetic sound, is also used to create the mood of the scare and to sometimes alert the audience to the danger. One of the greatest examples of this in horror is the theme in Jaws, used to tell the audience that the shark is approaching and that now is the time to feel scared, to feel anxious that something bad is going to happen. While sound is an integral part of the jump scare, as it is the initial factor that makes us jump, it is the visuals that stay with us the longest. In terms of short and long-term memory, sounds are less likely to be remembered than visuals. Visuals stay with us a long time. It's rare that it is the sound in a jump scare that we recall, but rather the shocking or surprising image that flashed before us. And so, by closing our eyes to the scare, we don't prevent it, but we do lessen the effect. As after the initial jump or startle response at the sound, we have no visuals that will linger with us long after the startle response has worn off. There is another way to lessen the effect of the jump scare, and that is through overexposure and desensitization. Over time, the more horror we watch, the more desensitized we become to the formulas of the jump scare. But filmmakers are aware of this, and so are forced to become more inventive with their scares. So, if you'd rather avoid succumbing to jump scares, then it's best to watch your horror at home, in the light, with the sound on low after a fantastic night's sleep and with your eyes closed. Otherwise, we'll just have to accept that the startle response is an unavoidable biological legacy inherited from our ancestors. Jump scares have been a part of horror films since the early days of cinema. Silent films like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari from 1920 and Nosferatu from 1922 employed sudden appearances or startling events to evoke fear in audiences. But it wasn't until 1925 that we got what a lot of people consider to be the first jump scare in The Phantom of the Opera. The scene follows opera singer Christine, who is in the lair of the Phantom. Christine approaches the Phantom and removes his mask only to reveal a shocking and disfigured face underneath. As it was the silent era of film, the scare was based on visuals alone, and for the day, the sight of Lon Chaney's face was enough to incite fear, screaming, and even fainting, apparently. Today, of course, the scene is very tame, but you can't deny the artistic way the reveal is delivered. The early filmmakers used visual shocks to create moments of terror, laying the basic foundation for future jump scare techniques. The eerie atmosphere, combined with unexpected visuals, captivated audiences and set the stage for the horror genre. Another jump scare from early cinema that is also often credited with being the first jump scare can be found in 1942's Cat People. Now, while the scare in Phantom of the Opera predates the Cat People by 17 years, the jump scare in Cat People now employs the use of sound. In the scene, a young woman named Alice is walking home stalked by the female lead, Irina. The filmmakers build tension throughout as Irina gains on Alice, using shadows and the clicking of heels on the pavement to create a sense of dread. And just when the audience thinks something will happen to Alice, a bus pulls into frame suddenly with the loud and jarring sound of the engine creating a jump scare. This scare would go on to be called the Luton bus scare, named after the producer on the film, Val Luton. The fake-out style of the Luton bus scare would go on to become a staple of horror films, further evolving into the animal scare or the old hand-on-the-shoulder scare. Throughout the mid-20th century, classic horror films like Psycho in 1960, Night of the Living Dead in 1968, and The Exorcist in 1973 incorporated jump scares alongside psychological terror and suspenseful storytelling. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho revolutionized the use of jump scares with the infamous shower scene that combined shocking visuals with a screeching score. But the shower scene isn't the only impactful jump scare of the film. Towards the end of the runtime, Marion's sister Lila is searching the Bates house for Mrs. Bates. When she heads down to the fruit cellar, she finds what appears to be Mrs. Bates sitting in a chair, only to discover that it's actually her corpse, creating a jump scare through the use of visuals and sound, but also moving the story along and revealing that it was in fact Norman who was the killer. Psycho wasn't the only film from the 60s involving the jump scare. Repulsion from 1965 is the film that first introduced audiences to the mirror scare. But while the 60s saw an innovation in jump scares, they were only used on an average of 2.6 times per film, according to Where's the Jump. By the 1970s, this had significantly increased to 5.6 times per film. And with Hitchcock having laid the groundwork for jump scares to be used as a storytelling device, we saw films such as Carrie from 1976 and Halloween from 1978 using jump scares at or towards the end of their films to tell the audience that the evil isn't necessarily over. In Halloween, we get the now iconic Not Quite Dead scare, where the killer comes back for one last scare. But of course, while jump scares were now being used to convey a message to the audience, they were also simply being used to create a moment of terror, crafting a scare from both sound and shocking imagery. Some of the most reputable and highly regarded horror films ever made have included jump scares in their repertoire. The Exorcist in 1973, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974, and Jaws in 1975 all used sound and sudden movements to create unforgettable moments of terror. The 1980s saw a surge in slasher films, which you'll know if you saw my evolution of the slasher film episode. These films popularized jump scares as a staple of the genre, combining them with graphic violence and gore to shock audiences. Directors like John Carpenter and Wes Craven perfected the art of building tension through atmosphere and then delivering a sudden, terrifying jolt. The 80s also saw an overuse and oversaturation of the jump scare, as filmmakers were desperately trying to cash in on the success of films such as Halloween, Friday the 13th, and so we saw an onslaught of low-budget slasher films filled to the brim with jump scares. In the 80s, the average number of jump scares per film was 9.5, with films such as Evil Dead 2 having a whopping 27 jump scares. The 1980s also saw a further evolution of the jump scare, as we were now introduced to the false awakening scare in films such as An American Werewolf in London and A Nightmare on Elm Street. There was a decline in the number of jump scares used by the 1990s, with the average per film dropping to 7.9. The genre saw a decline and a resurgence during the 90s, and with the rise of the meta self-aware horror film came an expectation on more than just simple lazy jump scares. Although with Scream from 1996 clocking in 19 jump scares and I Know What You Did Last Summer clocking in 13, these were still very much a staple of the genre. This frequent use of jump scares cemented their place in horror cinema, but it also led audiences to start to become disillusioned with them. The 2000s to 2010 actually saw a huge resurgence in the use of jump scares, hitting the highest average since the 1980s. And it's not hard to see why when you consider that the early 2000s saw a large number of remakes of slasher films from the late 1970s and the 1980s, a subgenre famous for its inclusion of the jump scare. But when creating a remake of an already established film, audiences expect something a little different. Bigger kills and bigger scares, or more scares. From 2000 to 2004, the average jump scare per film was 8.4, with that rising to 9.5 between 2005 and 2010, with it hitting a new high between 2010 and 2014 of an average of 10.2 jump scares per film. Films such as Insidious from 2010 and The Conjuring from 2013 saw a high number of jump scares, with The Conjuring having 12 and Insidious having a whopping 24. Mentioned earlier though, James Wan isn't a fan of fake out scares, so most of the jump scares in these films are genuine scares with genuine payoff. While both of these films sometimes have mixed reviews, I think a lot of people agree that two of the best jump scares from recent horror come from these two films. The use of jump scares has significantly decreased in recent years, and some credit this decline to the rise of elevated horror that began to surface from the mid-2010s. Films such as The Witch, Get Out, Midsommar and Hereditary kept the use of jump scares to a minimum, if at all, relying on characters, situations, and social issues to create terror and scares rather than strong visuals and loud sounds. Jump scares have gathered a mixed reputation among horror fans and audiences over the years. While some appreciate the immediate thrill and adrenaline rush that jump scares can provide, others criticise them as a cheap and/or lazy tactic used to create a scare without much originality or substance. Some audiences believe that an excessive over-reliance on jump scares can actually detract from the overall quality of a horror film, using shock value rather than trying to build genuine suspense and tension. Additionally, there are those that argue that jump scares can become predictable and formulaic when overused, diminishing their effectiveness and enjoyment level over time. We covered earlier the different types of jump scares that exist, and the fact that these scares can be grouped into a type and labelled is evidence that they are in fact used a lot. The fact that they can be formulaic and predictable lends itself to another complaint, that they can be seen as manipulating the audience into a startle rather than genuinely frightening them. However, there are those who advocate for and enjoy a jump scare, believing that when used sparingly and skillfully, they can actually enhance the viewing experience. First of all, there is a level of comfort and familiarity with jump scares. We can feel a comfort in seeing the scare signposted to us before it happens. It also lends itself to be a social experience. You can be startled and then laugh as a group and roll your eyes at the fact that it got you. Think of those great sleepover horror movies, usually a slasher, which are often full to the brim with jump scares. We can, as an audience, be in on the joke of and the fun of a jump scare. A really good example of this is the jump scare in Scream 5, in my opinion, where one of the teenagers is walking around his house and the kill or jump scare is signposted very clearly, and as an audience we sit there expecting it to happen. But what then actually happens is the filmmakers, they know it's going to be a jump scare, and they know the audience know it's going to be a jump scare, so they drag the scene on for an unusually long time. And within that scene, there are multiple fake outs of doors and fridges being closed and no one being behind him. Until eventually, once the audience starts to relax and feel the almost ridiculousness of it all, that's when the jump scare and kill happens. So the filmmakers invite the audience to be in on the joke on the formula of and predictability of a jump scare. There are also those who enjoy the instant gratification of a jump scare, rather than a slow burn of tension over time. The immediate payoff of creating fear and excitement can be appealing to quick thrill seekers. And there are those who enjoy the physical reaction of a startle response, which can lend the viewing experience to be more immersive and visceral. I suppose the enjoyment of the physical reaction to a jump scare could be seen as akin to that of the reaction to thrills such as roller coasters and skydiving. Overall, people's enjoyment of jump scares can vary widely depending on individual preferences and experiences. While some may find them cheap or manipulative, others may appreciate them for the adrenaline rush and excitement they provide. Some horror film fans embrace them as essential elements of the genre, while others prefer more nuanced approaches to fear and storytelling. As we conclude our exploration of the evolution of the jump scare, one thing becomes abundantly clear. These moments of sudden terror have become an integral part of horror cinema, captivating audiences for decades with their ability to elicit fear and adrenaline. From the earliest silent films to the modern digital age, filmmakers have continuously innovated and refined the art of the jump scare, using sound, imagery, and psychological manipulation to keep viewers on the edge of their seats. While opinions on jump scares may vary among audiences, there's no denying their enduring impact on the genre. Whether loved or loathed, the jump scare remains a powerful tool in the filmmaker's arsenal, ensuring that the thrill of the unexpected will continue to haunt moviegoers for years to come. I hope you enjoyed this look at the evolution of the jump scare. As always, I look forward to hearing your thoughts on them, whether you're a fan or not. If you're new here, then don't forget to subscribe and join the What the Horror family, and if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up. I will be releasing a companion episode to this one listing some of the best jump scares in horror, so keep an eye out for that one. And if you would like to join this list of names here and have access to extra content every week, or just to support the channel, then I will leave a link to my Patreon page in the description box below. But in the meantime, thank you as always for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye.